Hello, and welcome to the live Week 11 waiver show on RotoViz Radio. I'm Kevin Szafraniec, and as always, I'm joined by Blair Andrews. Blair, how's it going?
It's going great. Excited to dig into some of these waiver topics. And are you hearing like an echo?
No, I'm not. We are having some technical difficulties right off the rip.
Hold on.
I would sing for everybody, but I'm just not. Nobody wants that. I'll drive more people away than keep them on.
Oh, I got it. I had the YouTube video still open, so I was hearing it like a few seconds later. I didn't even realize that. In user error.
Prestige worldwide. Why?
All right, off to a good start.
Yeah. So it's going okay, huh?
Yeah, it's going better now.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going crazy though. I keep everything you say. I would hear it again a few seconds later, be like, "What?" Okay, now we're good. Everything I say, I would hear it back to me.
Yep. So now the most entertaining part of the show is over. Everybody can log off. Thank you for tuning in. So getting into the real content. Anyone who has consistently read the waiver wire column this season has seen the list of viable fantasy starters just get thinner and thinner every week. I mean, we still have a couple guys at quarterback and like maybe tight end that could be like plug and play options that are readily available, but no, it's not pretty anymore. We're getting to that point in the season, but perhaps our shining light heading into Week 11 is Audric Estime. I mean, after he pretty much convincingly led the Broncos backfield in touches against the Chiefs last week. So, I mean, how are we feeling about this? Am I just grasping for straws right here by propping up Estime, or is his profile something we should be getting excited about?
Well, I mean, his profile is definitely something to get excited about. He's one of the few 20-year-old rookie running backs in this class, which obviously is a big deal. And I mean, the other thing is he was just so convincingly out carried the other backs in his backfield. Like when you're relegating Javonte Williams to only one carry, I mean, that I think is worth paying attention to. Obviously, it seems like the Broncos are kind of, I don't know, they're trying to find their identity themselves. So they could be experimenting with some different things and might decide that this experiment has gone on long enough. Let's go back to Javonte. Who really knows? But you know, after he led the team in snaps and carries, and wasn't a great PPR day from him, but compared to what you saw from Williams and McLaughlin, seems like you give the edge to Estime, at least in the short term. And he definitely has a profile that makes you think he could be a long-term upside play.
Yeah, the one thing, so when I was going through this for the waiver article, I was full go, wheels up, Audric Estime, and as I was looking a little more into his profile, I found out that he has not had a single target all season. And that's where I kind of started seeing some pause for concern, because no matter what, it seems pretty obvious that the Broncos are saying or know something we don't, whether it be, I mean, he just can't catch, apparently. I mean, what it seems like kind of what it comes down to. So no matter how good he is running the ball, he'll never be able to probably completely phase out the other two backs. One of those two backs is always going to be involved and taking away plenty of the high value touches that we see.
Yeah. For reference, he had only 26 receptions his entire 3-year collegiate career, 17 receptions in his final season, but only 142 yards, never had more than a 5% receiving yardage market share. I mean, clearly this has never been his strength. So I don't think it's that surprising to see him not be used in that way. But of course, we do have some good examples of of players who didn't catch a lot of passes in college who then come in and are used in the passing game regardless. We're kind of seeing it this year with Kenneth Walker. So, you would hope that if Estime is the real deal, he'll eventually be targeted. He'll eventually kind of grow into that kind of well-rounded fantasy role, but certainly doesn't look like it is going to happen this year.
Yeah. And I mean, even watching him though, we brought this up on the Sunday night show, and it's something that watching his college highlights, him playing college, he did not look as like explosive or agile or spry or whatever adjective you wanna assign to that. He didn't look as good in college as he does in the pros. I mean, he seems like he's quicker. And I don't know if that's just a result of just college players overall just being slower, so it just makes everybody look slower. But you would think it would be the opposite, where if a guy's a supreme athlete, he would just look like 10 times faster than college guys. And I mean, that's really just the eye test in my mind, basically. Something that I saw, and it's the same thing I saw from like Braylon Allen, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. But it's just something like, I remember watching him in college, and I was just like, this guy looks like he's literally running through mud. And now watching in the NFL, I mean, he looks good. He looks the best out of all the Broncos backs for sure.
Yeah.
I don't want to be like trying to poke holes, because I want to prop this guy up. I want to have somebody fun to talk about. But also he does. So he's had 30 carries this year, but he's also had 2 fumbles. Which, I mean, if we just take his week 10 usage as what he could see going forward, that essentially means he'll have 1 fumble a game, and that's not going to keep you in the coach Sean Payton's good graces, or any coach's good graces. So just stuff to really just give a well-rounded view of really kind of what Estime's been this season. And I kind of just went back and looked at his profile. You mentioned the 20 years old, which is like I think that's the most glaring, positive in his profile. A lot was made of his really terrible 40-second 40-yard dash time, his 4.71. So at the end of the day, a lot of his testing wasn't great. He had a 16th percentile speed score, a 40th percentile freak score, but he did enough in his jumps that he still had an 88% explosion score. And I think that's what we're seeing from him, and probably a lot of the reason why he has looked so good when he has been on the field.
Not exactly the combine you want to see, but I think he showed enough at his size that you have some hope for him to kind of be somewhat electric with the ball in his hands, and we're kind of seeing that, as you said. So sticking
with Denver, Bo Nix, still QB1 in fantasy scoring, yet he's still available in most home leagues. He's joined in the top tier of this week's waiver wire article by Justin Herbert, and it's kind of crazy. I didn't realize this initially. I had kind of Bo Nix separated, and I had the pocket quarterbacks, not even in a different tier, but just kind of grouped together. And then once kind of looking through the stats, like over the past 4 games, the Nix and Herbert's production has been like almost exactly the same. PPR points, they're divided by 0.1 PPR point per game. They come in back to back in QB ratings, and the comparisons don't really stop there. After we take into account that they both played at Oregon. I mean, obviously Bo Nix went to Auburn first and then transferred. And something that could be related, even though they had different coaching staffs, I do believe, was Chip Kelly probably, and then I don't know who the Oregon's coach is right now, honestly, but maybe that could be a reason that why they both kind of had similar question marks coming in NFL. More system guys, could they do it? Herbert wasn't really known for really like chucking it deep. It was just kind of, they both kind of had the same questions, but they were both drafted high. And obviously we saw what Herbert did with that. And I mean, right now we could see Bo Nix kind of overcoming the same, or answering, I guess, the same questions that people were having if he could actually do it the NFL. So two-parter. So first part, who would you be prioritizing between Herbert and Nix rest of the season? And then the second part is like, should those similarities be between the two be telling of what we can kind of expect from Nix, just in his NFL career in general?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good comp in general in terms of what I'm looking, in terms of rest of season. One thing you point out in the waiver article is how they're like right there in terms of rest of season schedule. Denver at number 4, Chargers at number 5. So when you're looking to like play the matchups, it's pretty similar. You maybe would give Nix a little bit of an edge just because it seems like the Chargers don't really want to throw that much, although it's also not really clear to me that the Broncos really want to throw that much if they didn't have to, you know.
Mhm.
I mean, Nix had 30 attempts last week. He mostly has been held below like 230 passing yards, except for 2 games actually.
Mhm.
He's been below 250 in all but one game.
Yeah.
So yeah, the passing volume probably isn't there for either of them. Maybe there's a little more rushing upside with Nix though, which would give him
Mhm.
the edge. But I think it's pretty close between
Yeah,
those two guys.
and that's something that it wasn't just okay. So the passing is whatever, uh, but like really the thing that we're seeing out of Herbert right now is his rushing attempts go up because over that
Mhm.
last 4-game stretch, he's been averaging 5 attempts for 23 yards, which isn't great. But seeing how this guy had was plantar fasciitis in the off season, and then kind of aggravated it like at least once or twice this season. I've seen him, he was hobbled by it a few weeks this year. It's not nothing because when you look
Yeah.
at Nix, Nix is averaging 6 carries for 28 yards. Herbert's getting 5 for 23. They both had one rushing touchdown in the last 4 weeks. And like literally these guys are just so eerily similar. I'm like, I can't push these guys apart because they're literally like, it's like this either the Spider-Man meme or the Office meme where it's like, no, it's the same picture, it's the
Yeah.
same guy. So I think I just thought that was just another, I guess maybe another feather in Nix's cap. Just because, Herbert obviously had one of the best rookie seasons we've ever seen from a quarterback, but
Right.
he just, the volume was so high, and he's been such a volume player. When we put these two guys in similar offenses, they look a lot the same, and the fact that they might be the same age, I don't know, because I know Big Nix is pretty old, but I just think it's really promising that we're kind of seeing this reflection of each other.
For sure. It does look like Nix has about almost 20, more than that, 24 additional rushing attempts on the
Mhm.
season so far. So uh, now that, of course, the Chargers have had their bye already and the Broncos haven't. So that is something to take into account. But he does have a little bit of an edge there in terms of the rushing workload. So maybe that's enough to push you in Nix's direction,
Yeah, I mean, I
because
don't.
passing wise, they're pretty similar. I think you probably expect Herbert to be a better passer, but he's just not getting the volume.
Yeah.
And if well, I mean, both of these teams are not going to try to throw a lot.
Yeah, and I mean, I'd say going with Nix just because he has the history of rushing, and it seems like
Right.
one of the big things the Chiefs tried to do this past week was keep him in the pocket. So he was at negative rushing yards this week. So
Mm,
like literally, obviously that dings him a little bit because I know earlier in the season he was averaging about 6 fantasy points per game just as a rusher alone. So then obviously if we just look at the averages here, that doesn't add up to 6 points. So,
yeah,
it's seen a little bit of a dip, and a lot of it had to do with this past game against the Chiefs. So I do think I'm with you on that I think Nix is there, but either of them, I'd be happy to start either of these guys rest of the season. I think they're just undervalued by fantasy managers in general, kind of anchoring to early season stuff. Their performances, over the first few weeks, or even like going all the way back to the offseason stuff about how run heavy the Chargers are going to be. I mean, Herbert's getting 30 pass attempts a game. Not great, but also not terrible.
Yeah.
More than I think that some people are probably expecting him to. So I
Right.
see either of these guys going forward, I'd be happy, especially if if you're missing Dak, like
Yeah.
you're not going to be going with Cooper Rush or Trey Lance. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we move on, do you feel like either of Dallas's options with Rush being Rush or Lance can become viable super flex? I mean, it's not. I haven't heard anything specifically saying that Dak is going to miss the rest of the season, but it pretty much all arrows are pointing that way.
Yeah. It's really hard to see with those two guys. I mean, neither of them looked good last week. We didn't get to see a lot of Lance, but you know, somehow, despite the fact that he completed 2/3 of his passes, he still had a worse QB rating than Rush, and probably because of the interception. But I mean, it was just ugly. So yeah, I don't really see them being viable, either of them. I think this is a big blow, obviously, for the Cowboys offense. My big question marks are about how much this affects not only, I mean, mostly kind of the downstream guys. Like CD Lamb might still be okay, but can you start anyone else in the Cowboys offense?
Yeah,
Probably
and
not.
that's really probably not. I mean,
Yeah.
and one of the big things is I haven't really looked into the data yet on these guys, but obviously with Trey Lance being a rushing guy, you're assuming he's probably not going to check down that much. Maybe Cooper Rush might be checking down, so maybe say Dottle still has a good amount of value, because when you see a lot of these backup quarterbacks come in, they just check down a ton. It's either they fire a target to the top guy, so CD gets a ton of volume, or they check down to their running back. So that could always be an option if they decide to go with Rush. But I just feel like
Yeah.
with all the, it's about time that they probably concede the season if Dak is out. And in that case, I feel like they'll just want to see what they have in Trey Lance, just because of the draft capital and all that sort of stuff, and the name that he has. And even if we know that Lance is the guy for any stretch of they just say we're going with him to see what we have. I mean, I think just on his rushing, like a poor man's early career Justin Fields, which sounds really bad, where he just might put up a couple like 100-yard rushing games and
Yeah,
do,
could happen.
it like that's about the best case scenario that I could see. But all in all,
Right.
I mean, I
Yeah.
was trying to stay somewhat optimistic, and Cooper Rush looked terrible, and that was kind of, he was 50-50 when he had come in for Dak Prescott a couple years ago, where he had two pretty decent games, and he had two like pretty bad games. So we got the bad games off the bat, and
Yeah.
I mean, I don't, maybe just the whole vibes there in Dallas is just gonna infiltrate into every aspect of that team. So
Yeah.
sad to see, especially for guys like CD and stuff. But I mean, football's football, right? People are gonna get hurt.
Right.
So talking about ugly, and there's probably no other way to frame the wide receiver section of the waiver wire article today. We really have gotten to the point of the point of the season where the waiver wire is just void of talent at wide receiver. Not really void of talent, but void of viable, like, plug and play sort of talent. There's guys with upside. There's different profiles in there, but there's no more Cedric Tillmans. Like, we're done with that now, it seems like. So in today's article, I broke up the top tier into like different groups based on their rest of season roles. So I just want to do some like quick fire from the groups that I put together and see like how you prefer these guys going forward. So group one was young players on bad offenses, but they do both. They offer kind of both floor and ceiling right now. So who would you rank, or how would you rank these guys between Xavier Legette, Jalen Coker, and this one I'm not as sure about, but I still put in there, but Mario Douglas?
I guess I would go, man, I'm trying not to be biased, but I want to say Coker, Legette, Douglas. And I do think Coker seems so far to have the kind of advantage in terms of target earning. But, the huge difference in draft capital does make me think that Carolina might be more eager to see what Leggett can do and might try harder to work him in to the offense. So I think I'd go with one of those Carolina guys before Douglas. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I was at. I said Demario Douglas becomes more interesting in PPR, obviously, because he gets a lot of those screen passes and short dump offs. He's one of those guys, but just not. But he's one of those guys in a very bad offense, which really is kind of rough. But I'm pretty much with you. I mean, I think Leggett and Coker are clearly ahead, and even writing up kind of that Carolina passing offense that last week, just between Leggett, Coker, and Jatavian Sanders. You know, Leggett was the PPR scam guys. Yep, definitely. You know, the very, very minus version of Jarvis Landry. But those guys, you know, Leggett's the one getting more volume, but like Coker and Sanders both are really good after the catch. They're putting a lot of stuff together and pretty balanced too, I do believe, before and after contact. So good to see. Coker's popped in a lot of our advanced stats stuff too. So
yeah,
it's good to see, especially for an undrafted guy to see the field so early in his career. So I mean, wheels up, especially. I mean, obviously, dynasty. Coker's probably the easiest of those guys to get, I'm guessing, right. And he may just be the best of them flat out.
Yeah, could
be.
Yep.
Yeah. So group 2 is players with high draft pedigree, but their team situations could limit their opportunities. We're talking here about Quentin Johnston and Ricky Pearsall. How do you feel about those two guys?
Man, there's a little bit more of an unknown with Pearsall, which makes me a little more intrigued. But we have seen Johnson put up a couple big games this year. So, it would be pretty weird for him to have as bad a rookie season as he had, and to start year 2 off pretty boom bust and a lot of bust, and then to go on and become a consistent producer. Whereas with Pearsall, maybe all it takes is another injury. Devo gets hurt, Kittle gets hurt, something like that. McCaffrey gets hurt again. Maybe Pearsall gets worked in to the passing game a little bit more down the stretch. He did have a pretty good week 2 game. Week 10, sorry. So, coming off of a decent performance, I think it can make sense to pick him up and see if he can keep that going. So I guess I'd prioritize Pearsall over Johnson just because of the unknown factor that kind of gives him a little more theoretical upside.
Yeah, and it's really as a question of if we think Quentin Johnston can remain efficient, because that's what he has to do in such a low volume offense. And the knock that I had on Pearsall in the article was, he's 4th among the San Francisco 49ers receivers in pecking order, and that's before we add in Christian McCaffrey. Yeah. And I feel like Juwan Jennings is firmly ahead of him. Yeah. So I mean, maybe McCaffrey, but it's really, and like all these questions are really, maybe not the first one. Demario Douglas is clearly behind the Carolina guys, but it really is just a question of preference. It's hard to like one versus the other.
Right. I mean, yeah, I do agree that Jennings is clearly ahead of him, but if Pearsall has another good game, it wouldn't take much, I think, for Pearsall to flip-flop them and for him to just become kind of the wide receiver 2, if you don't count Kittle or McCaffrey.
Yeah. So third group are veteran deep threats on good offenses who have shown the ability to provide spike weeks. So we're looking at Rashad Bateman and Noah Brown. So how do you feel about those two guys?
Yeah, that's I mean, Bateman has looked really good this year, actually. He's obviously not had the target the targets, with Zay Flowers getting most of those, and I think with Deontay Johnson getting more comfortable with the offense, there's not much hope that Bateman will get those targets. But I mean, you could say the same thing really about Noah Brown, who's had some big plays, really, not even big games. He's had like a few big plays that have helped him get to some usable fantasy scores, but he also does not seem to be earning targets the way you would want for anybody you'd feel comfortable starting. So I think in this case, I'd prioritize Bateman as well, but I have real question marks about both of them. Yeah, I don't know. Am I missing something here with Brown?
No, not really. I think it's more it's more kind of like the same Quentin Johnson, Ricky Pearsall sort of question is, Bateman he's produced more, or he's in the better offense, but now it's just such a log jam there that where Noah Brown he's I don't think there's really any question that he's the wide receiver too. I don't think Diami Brown is the wide receiver too in for the Commanders. I don't think Olamandi Zacchaeus is the wide receiver too. So it's more a question of direct path to opportunity versus quality or even talent. And pretty much what Rashad Bateman, this is just me just going off memory, but it feels like all the spike weeks that maybe Rashad Bateman's had this year are maybe like the aggregate of every season that Noah Brown's had. He's probably had that many spike weeks. He pops off he's all going back to Dallas. He pops off for a few big games here and there and kind of disappears. And I think just this year is probably the highest on a depth chart he may have ever been in his career. So I always like him. I mean, I've rostered him and played him, especially like on my dynasty best ball teams. He's a great player for those, but in a managed leagues, he's kind of he's definitely just a rough, he's a risky pick. He's a risky guy to throw in there.
I didn't realize he actually has had at least 6 targets in each of the last 3 games and 4 of the last 5. Brown, that is, which is kind of interesting. Maybe he is a more important part of that offense than I had been aware. It just hasn't quite turned into really a huge fantasy day yet. So yeah, perhaps from that perspective, with Johnson coming in and Bateman, even though Bateman had 8 targets last week, still Flowers is kind of the main guy there, and I think Johnson's going to start earning more. Andrews is still going to command some targets. There's definitely more room for Brown to emerge in Washington as like a legitimate target earner, and maybe that's what we're starting to see over these last 3 weeks. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. Brown is an interesting player in that I think he's like a 6th or 7th round pick, but he was a true early declare and has hung around the league a long time and, kind of proven himself as an NFL caliber talent, even though not necessarily a fantasy viable one. But he's the sort of player that you do tend to see kind of late career breakouts from.
Yeah. I'm gonna say he's always been a guy I like watching, and he just pops up he's almost like a different version of like Demarcus Robinson, who just shows up for like 2 or 3 games. He's relevant for a few games. We just saw it from Demarcus Robinson, over the past like 2 weeks before the weekend, before Monday night. He had 2 touchdowns in games, and we probably won't hear from him until late 2025, early 2026. He'll be back. He'll be back, in waiver wire columns. But beyond that, that's just what they do. And another guy. I don't get your opinion on MVS with the Saints. Is he their wide? He's got to be their wide receiver 1, right?
I mean, he might as well be, right? He had only, I think, 3 targets in their game last week, but turned them into 2 touchdowns. Is that right? Do I have that stat line right?
I'm not sure, honestly. He didn't even cross my mind when I was writing the article. I wasn't going down that road.
I think avoid New Orleans, right?
Yeah, I think that's
the most MVS line ever. That's right.
Yeah. Oh, geez. Yeah, I mean, he's one of those guys that, I obviously would trust either Rashad Bateman or Noah Brown over MVS any of the week. So yeah, 3 catches, 3 targets, 3 catches, 109 yards, 2 touchdowns, 25.9 PPR points. So but then so then we chase after that, and somebody gets enough confidence to throw him their lineup, and then he does nothing. He gives you a 0. So don't go chasing waterfalls or MVSs.
Yeah. Now Olave, do we know anything about his status?
He's on IR. I know that much, but that's about it.
Oh, is he? I didn't even.
Yeah. And it said,
Maybe I'm
I think
confusing
it was just
else.
it was just a Twitter blurb that I saw, but he was hitting IR and said he could be out for the season. But I think it's just because of how condensed his concussions were.
Yeah. Okay.
So, I mean, and what's the point of really running? What's the point of really running on? Greg D comes in and says, "Great nickname, the Rizzler." I mean, maybe he should just stick around New Orleans just for the fact of that nickname. The Rizzler is pretty much probably about the best one we could ever hope for. But he said the interim head coach says he's not out for the year, so hope for Olave still.
All right.
While we are on the subject of borderline starters, there were 3 running backs I kind of wanted to get your opinion on. One of them I know your opinion on pretty well, but there's 2 others that I wanted to talk about as well. So Tajay Spears and Gus Edwards both came back after multi-game absences, and both got over 10 touches and over 50 yards last week. And then Tyler Algier has just been a staple all season. He had very Tyler Algier line of 11 carries for 59 yards, while Bijan had a really good fantasy day. So clear number 2. So with the sad state of what the waiver wire is at this point, do all 3 of these guys become interesting as possible spot starts if they're available in your league?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Algier does. He's kind of got the touchdown equity a bit. Like his carries are pretty safe. His opportunity is pretty safe. I guess you would say the same for Edwards as well, although I think we're maybe not exactly sure what to expect from him yet. I think Spears is the most interesting just because it seems like he has the clearest path to actually become the starter even without an injury. Whereas that's never going to happen with Algier and very unlikely with Edwards. Dobbins actually has looked. He had a stretch there where he was kind of underperforming pretty bad, but he's looked good the last 2 weeks. So I think there's not much chance that Edwards kind of overtakes that role. So he's a clear backup. Obviously, anything could happen in terms of injuries, and all 3 of these guys would become extremely valuable in the case of an injury. But Spears to me looks like the one who's closest to maybe turning into a starter, kind of just based on this. Again, I'm probably biased because I was, Spears was my guy heading into the season. And maybe Pollard has a stronger grip on that starting role than I think he does. That's definitely possible.
Yeah.
It's probably likely. I'm probably wrong, but sticking to my guns.
But I'm right there with you too, especially in the article. That's the same way that I ranked him, just for the same things that you said. Number 1, Spears is the only one that offers really any receiving upside. And actually, out of the 3, even though Spears only played 6 games and Algier's been in 10 games, but Spears is averaging 7.5 PPR points per game to Algier's 7.1. So even, of those 3, when they're active, Spears is getting fantasy owners the most points. And on top of it, when you just look at their strength of schedule in the strength of schedule app, Tennessee running backs have the 13th best schedule, where the Falcons have the 23rd, and then the Chargers have the 29th, schedule for running back. So he has the best schedule, dual threat. And then, like you said too, that's another point that I put in there, is he's really the only one of those 3 guys that has any chance to become his team's running back one without an injury. So I'm with you on Spears. To say I love him too. I just, Gus Edwards was one of those guys that he was super low owned. You could have got him for $1, and he's, it was the writing was kind of on the wall. Even though Hassan Haskins came in and got a touchdown this week at the goal line, but Kamani Vidal obviously wasn't it, and it's kind of everybody kind of it was pretty apparent that he wasn't it when he was in there. So just whenever Gus Edwards came back, it was probably pretty likely that he was just going to fall right back into that running back to role, regardless if he really deserved it or not. So
yeah, right.
I'm saying Spears, Algier, and Edwards.
Yeah.
So
I would agree with that. I mean, actually, I do think, man, I mean, I think that Dobbins is in more danger of losing his job than Robinson, obviously. Not that that's likely, but, is it possible that Edwards comes back, is running the ball well, and we get kind of an even split between Dobbins and Edwards in terms of the carries and the kind of the goal line looks, especially, which are pretty valuable? Yeah, maybe.
Yeah. So, and J.K. Dobbins was a huge story at the beginning of the year. It's kind of tailed off a little bit.
Right.
So we'll see. But at the same time, Edwards has not looked good. He's only averaging 3.6 PPR points per game, averaging 10 carries for 34 yards. He's had one target all season long. Like, I don't think even if Dobbins isn't any danger of tailing off, Edwards or anybody really on that roster isn't really a threat to take the job away from him. So
yeah.
We got a trade question coming in. Scary Terry McLaurin and J.K. Dobbins for Cup and Chubb.
What did Cup end up doing last week? I mean, on the face of it, I want to say yes. This looks like a good trade, like an upgrade at wide receiver and kind of a sideways move at running back.
Yeah. So last night, Cooper Kupp had 15 PPR points, 7 for 7 for 80 yards. So probably not his best game, but that's probably about as like a floor game that's like a Cooper Kupp floor game. 15 PPR points. He was outplayed by Puka, who had 14 targets, 9 receptions for 98 yards. So, it seems like Puka, even with his knee injury, and obviously Cooper Kupp had the high ankle, but it does really kind of seem like Puka might be their preference in the passing game, even if it's in shorter targets. We don't really know because he got kicked out of the game last week, but in that first game where they were both back, and they were like ripping it to Puka right off the rip.
McLaurin is tough to trade though as well because he's been playing pretty well lately, like either getting 100 yards or scoring 2 touchdowns in each of his last 5 games, I think. And obviously, he could have a game coming up where he has 20 yards and 0 touchdowns, and that's almost certainly going to happen. So his floor definitely seems lower than Kupp's, but maybe he has a higher ceiling if you think Puka's the way they want to, the guy they want to go through in that offense. So it's kind of ceiling versus floor for the wide receivers. I think as with all trade questions, this one is very roster dependent.
And what I might kind of push back just for the fact that right now, through 10 games, McLaurin is the wide receiver 6, PPR wide receiver 6. Yeah. And that's pretty much what we would kind of be expecting. Pretty close to Cooper Kupp's ceiling at this point of his career as a wide receiver 6. And obviously you could see him tail off a little bit, but I might actually, I guess I'm just not back on Chubb just for the fact of obviously that offense is a mess. He hasn't looked bad since he's come back, but at the same time, it's just that I don't want to bet on an offense that's in shambles. So
Right.
I think I would actually lean McLaurin and Dobbins in that
McLaurin.
trade. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, after I'm looking at it, since week 3, here's a good stat. Since week 3, McLaurin has had either 100 yards or a touchdown in every game but one. In week 7, he didn't score a touchdown and he only had 98 yards.
Mhm.
So every other game, he's had either 100 yards or he scored a touchdown
What a
since week
bum.
3. Yeah. Come on. You couldn't get 2 more yards?
Yeah. We did not talk about Cam Akers, but there is some talk of him in the chat. How are you feeling about Akers? I did, so just for reference, in this week's article, I did have him in the tier below Edwards, Algier, and Spears. I have not heard anything as opposed to concerning Aaron Jones missing time or
Right.
anything like that with his rib.
Right.
So I did have him basically in that same tier with like guys like Zach Charbonnet, Braylon Allen, Ray Davis, Jerome Ford, guys that have some standalone value, but are clear running back twos and probably are more of like at this point without an injury to the guys in front of them, they're more of like Hail Mary flex sort of guys.
Yeah.
I wouldn't feel super confident. I know Akers have played really well in the last 2 games, but I do not feel like super confident. I like any of those guys. I feel just as confident slotting in Cam Akers and expecting him to have a good week as I would like Ray Davis or Braylon Allen at this point. They could score a touchdown. They could have some big runs. They're all good players, but they're just not getting the work to make them, guys that I'm super confident that are gonna, are consistent enough.
Right. And in fact, in the case of Davis and Allen, I probably give them the advantage just because I'm more confident that Akers is not good than I am with those 2 guys.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, yeah, he has had a couple good games. I think Jones came back into the game last week after getting that injury, so I mean, I would assume he's expected to keep playing. So I don't see anything there. It does look like Akers is clearly ahead of Ty Chandler.
Oh yeah.
So yeah, I think you kind of play him as a handcuff. He's probably like a less valuable version of Tyler Algier. I mean, the other question, I guess, is what's going on with the Vikings offense? Maybe this is just a 1 week, just a blip, and they'll be fine after this, or maybe this is kind of Sam Darnold meltdown that's going to have ripple effects throughout the offense. In which case, don't touch Akers.
Yeah, I think maybe it's a situation where Sam Darnold was watching too many scary movies around Halloween time and he's seeing ghosts again. I don't know, but that could be it. That could be it. Maybe he just needs a week or 2 to kind of get that all out of his system,
maybe.
And he'll be back to who he was before. Yep, new Darnold's looking like an old Darnold. And just for context, talking to Greg, he said he's staring at Akers on the waiver wire, and a lot of it's just who else is available.
Right.
Like I said, if any of Algier, Gus Edwards, Tajay Spears, I mean, those guys are all pretty close to 50% owned, and I think in some, depending on the format, whether it be ESPN or Yahoo, some of those guys are over 50%. So if any of those guys or Estime is available, I'd pick them over Spears. But then pretty much between Charbonnet, Braylon Allen, Ray Davis, Jerome Ford, or Akers. I mean, really, it's just a preference thing of like, who do you think has the biggest potential to hit in any given week? And that's another thing too. If you are a RotoViz subscriber, you go to the Strength of Schedule app, and then you can look into all the different matchups, whether it be rest of season or upcoming matchups. I can tell you, I'm just looking at the article right now, the waiver article, and Minnesota has a bottom third strength of schedule for running backs rest of the season. So whereas like Cleveland has the second best, the Jets have the best strength of schedule rest of the season. So maybe those, if you're not in too much of a bind currently at running back, you might want to consider those guys over it. If you're looking, it's just, and like I said, like Blair said, it really does depend on team context of like, when are you planning on slotting this guy, or is he just a Hail Mary play that could emerge.
Right.
And that being a pretty good segue. So in the intro of the article, I talked about like adding players that have shown potential as preemptive ads for pennies on the dollar, like Estime. I think I can't remember if he was a $1 ad or a 1% ad or a 5% ad last week.
Yeah.
And then, he comes, and that's been like that. Like even Gus Edwards was kind of the same thing. He was coming off IR. He was a $1 ad. Not to say these guys are world beaters, but at the same time, they have roles now, and you could have got them for super cheap. So this week, I feel like Jalen Wright and Sean Tucker are perfect examples of league winners that can be added for super cheap and pay off huge in the coming weeks. Is there any players at any position that you're eyeing that aren't getting like a ton of attention now, but could come up huge down the stretch?
Yeah, I mean, I like both those names you mentioned. Any guys at any position? I should have been prepared for this question.
Or maybe the guy that wrote the show sheet should have highlighted it in red.
Yeah. Joe King mentions John Mechie, who had a pretty big game, big-ish game. That's kind of an interesting one. Yeah, I kind of like that. One guy who you mentioned later in your article and is coming up on the show sheet, I do think is pretty interesting. Theo Johnson, tight end. Big athletic prospect who probably we didn't expect a lot from.
Except for Neil Dutton. Neil Dutton did.
Yeah, right.
Neil Dutton's guy.
Exactly. Neil's been on that all off season. Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I feel like at this point, if we, it's the rookies who haven't hit yet, who I'm really excited to see whether they can put something together. I mean, Marshawn Lloyd comes back and looks good. Mm-hmm. He's somebody I think is a pretty intriguing pickup if you've got space. Yeah, I'm blanking on anyone else, but those are the kinds of guys I'm looking at.
Yeah, and
Mechie is a good one.
Yeah. And then Joe King talks about adding Elijah Moore too. He's one of those guys, and I did mention them in the waiver. It was kind of a big cluster of all these multiple guys that seem to cannibalize each other. So we're talking about Elijah Moore and Judy. We're talking about Dontavian Wicks and Christian Watson, and then we're also talking about Alec Pearson and Adonai Mitchell, who actually looked pretty darn. He's probably the only Colts wide receiver that looked good, or at least seems like he's getting a boost right now from Joe Flacco. I can't say, some other guys are having decent games, but I mean, watching that game this week, I was like, oh, yeah, this is like the first time I've seen Adonai Mitchell look consistently good across an entire game. So guys to look to boost up. Obviously, Mitchell or Moore and Judy have the volume at their disposal, where the Green Bay guys have the best offense, and then kind of the Colts guys are kind of like in between, I guess, between those two scenarios. I don't really know what to say about those guys, but that's kind of what I'm thinking about those guys. It's just hard to trust any of them, I guess, consistently.
Right. Would you count? Let's see. Would Keaton Mitchell be a $1 ad, or is he?
He probably could be had for $1, and I think I lumped them together with guys that just basically pure handcuff guys that needed an injury to emerge. I said less than 5%. So
right. I mean, we've seen Justice Hill get a little bit of run in that game, in that running game, even with Derrick Henry kind of looking like a better version of Derrick Henry than we've ever seen. But what Mitchell did at the end of last year was pretty awesome. So if he comes back healthy, I think he's an exciting pickup who could have a little bit of value even without a Derrick Henry injury. Mm-hmm. They paid Hill. Yeah, well, they do like Hill a lot, but they liked him last year too, and Keaton still got in there.
Yeah, and one thing that even if Keaton Mitchell isn't like fully healthy, I mean, watching him last year and watching how electric he was, like he could afford to lose a step, and he would still probably be faster than 99% of the guys on the field. So, his injury wasn't something that I wasn't super worried about. It's just being like a straight line guy. No matter what, he was going to be good. And and you talked on Theo Johnson, Jatavian Sanders. We're running out of time here, so I really wanted to get into those guys, but just as kind of a teaser.
That's a good one too.
Yeah, Jatavian Sanders. I mean, between those guys were $1 ads that I had in the article at the tight end position, more because they're on the bye this week, but both of them have been coming on just over the last. So Sanders has had his bye, so over his last 5 games from week 5 to week 10, he's been tight end 17, but he's also missed a game, so he has that like knock against him where he probably could have been a little higher. Yeah. And then over Jatavian Sanders' last 5 games, which are week 6 to week 10, he's been the tight end 15. Both guys are averaging about 9 points per game. And if for any RotoViz subscribers, I put together a bunch of info. But if you're a subscriber, go into the Prospect Workout Explorer and look at Theo Johnson's testing numbers and his comps in the Workout Explorer. I'll throw out the comps real quick. But you definitely still want to go check out like his percentiles and some of the scores we put up on the site. So Workout Explorer comps for Theo Johnson were Jimmy Graham, Travis Kelce, T.J. Hockenson, Dallas Goedert, Greg Olsen, and Cole Kmet. Pretty okay. So he was an older guy. Jatavian Sanders has youth on his side and this, that, and the other. A lot of the stuff that we're going to be skimming over, I'm sure these guys are still going to be relevant next week. We can go back through it. I just want to do kind of a primer. We're going to start. I'm going to start doing some research into this year's rookie class. I mean, it's kind of transferring to dynasty season, so I'm excited to get into that. Just start looking at the guys because I'm not a huge college football guy. I know the names, but at the same time, I don't know enough about them to really have good formed opinions on them at this point. Right. I have basic outlines of their profiles, but that's about it. So I'm really excited to start diving deeper into that, and that's kind of is in the same mold of like these young rookie tight ends, because obviously, we don't really generally get a ton from rookie tight ends, and they're essentially going into year 2 is really when we're looking for them to pop. So maybe we'll get a little more into Theo Johnson, Jatavian Sanders next week. Anybody that's interested in go if you're a RotoViz subscriber, go check out these guys. And as a segue for that, this is just full of segues. So currently we are offering a 3-month subscription for the discounted price of $25.99, which is a $20 discount off the normal price. And if I'm not a mathematician here, Blair, but that's pretty darn close to 50% off.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
Seamless transitions, smooth as butter. Right, Joe King? So if anybody that's not a subscriber and wants to, we talk about tools and all these things on pods all the time. So if we're piquing your interest, just now's the time, especially coming down the home stretch. I say we're going to start having content for dynasty, for rookies, all that sort of stuff coming out as well. So you're going to have, you're going to have everything you need to finish off the season, and then everything you need to start next season. So good to know. So thank you everybody for submitting your waiver questions. Be sure to check out the site every day, as we got plenty of new content. As I say, you can get it for cheap. So I don't know what you're waiting for if you're not a subscriber already. So today, Neil Dutton's tight end streamers came out. We got defensive special teams streamers from Ross Durham, Dave's passing matchups every week, Sean's Zero RB Universe, Blair's Wrong Read, a suite of 30 industry leading tools. If you've ever been interested in seeing what we got to offer, now's the time. Anything else you want to talk about before we get out of here, Blair?
No, that's it. I do see Joe King's question about a second-year tight end about to break out. Davis Allen of the Rams. What do we think of him? Seems like he may have taken Colby Parkinson's job. Don't want to leave any breakout tight ends on the table when you're in a season like this one.
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are just we saw it. We saw them try to do it with everybody else, and it just seems like really the Cup and Puka don't really leave much for anybody else. I mean, we've seen hints, glimmers of Tyler Higbee in the past, and that was even before Puka was there. And I just don't think the tight end in that offense is really a valuable, position, or that's something that they value a ton outside of just, a guy on the field. So, I mean, I hope I'm wrong, obviously.
Yeah, I wouldn't pick up Davis Allen just yet, but who knows?
So with that being said, please like and subscribe to the RotoViz YouTube channel. If you could also leave us a rating and review on your favorite podcast app, we'd greatly appreciate it. For anybody that just wants to skip the 3-month, cheap price altogether and just jump in for a full year, you can enter the code RVRadio 2024 at checkout for a 10% discount. Thanks again to everybody for tuning in. Make sure to get those waiver claims in, and best of luck to everybody in week 11. For Blair Andrews, I'm Kevin Szafraniec. See y'all next week.